James Whitfield had not touched his daughter in 17 years, 4 months, and 11 days. He knew the number because he had been counting since the night a family court judge in Cleveland, Ohio, signed a custody modification order that removed him from his daughter Amara's life based on testimony he had never been given the opportunity to dispute. From a process his attorney had later told him was the worst miscarriage of family law procedure she had witnessed in 22 years of practice. He had been 29 years old. Amara had been 4. He had stood outside the courthouse on a November afternoon and understood for the first time in his life what the word devastation actually meant. Not as a description of a feeling, but as a physical state, the way a building looks after the structure that held it up has been removed. He had driven home. He had sat in his car for 2 hours. He had gotten up the next morning and gone to work because there was nothing else to do. On the afternoon 17 years later, when Steve Harvey said, "James, she's behind that door," James Whitfield's legs held. His hands did not. They shook at his sides for the 3 seconds it took the door at the back of Studio A to open, and then they stopped. Because he had brought them up to cover his face, and he stayed that way until his daughter's arms were around him. It was a Wednesday in October, taping day at ImageWorks Studios in Atlanta, and the studio was running its second family of the afternoon. James had come with his sister Renee, Renee's husband Carl, his co-worker and closest friend Marcus, and Marcus's teenage son Dante. James was 46 years old. He was a line supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Akron, Ohio, a job he had held for 11 years and performed with the kind of quiet excellence that gets you promoted twice without much fanfare. He coached a youth wrestling team on weekends. He sang in his church choir. He had built a life that functioned well from the outside and that contained, in a room he did not often open, a daughter-shaped absence that nothing had ever filled. Renee had filled out the Family Feud application. She had not asked James's permission. She had told him 3 weeks before the taping with the specific authority of an older sister who has decided her brother needs something and has stopped waiting for him to agree. James had come because Renee had a way of asking that was simply telling, and because some part of him, the part that had spent 17 years going to sleep every night, wondering whether Amara remembered him, what she had been told, whether she was safe and loved and had enough to eat, had not fully given up on the idea that the world could still move in his direction. The story of what happened in that Cleveland courtroom when Amara was 4 was the story of a system doing what systems sometimes do. It moved faster than the truth could keep up with. James and Amara's mother, a woman named Patricia, had separated when Amara was 2. The separation had been civil, the arrangement functional. James had been present every other weekend, 2 evenings a week, a father who showed up. And then Patricia had remarried, and her new husband had filed for step-parent adoption, and a process had begun that James's attorney had challenged at every stage and lost at every stage for reasons that amounted, in the end, to timing and paperwork and the specific bureaucratic momentum that builds when a system decides a direction and keeps moving. He had written letters, 31 of them over 17 years. He had sent them to an address that had stopped being current by the 3rd letter, and he had kept sending them anyway because the alternative was silence, and he could not give her silence. He had kept copies of all 31 in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of his desk at home. He had never opened the folder after filing each one. He only ever moved forward. What James did not know, what nobody told him, what the Family Feud producers had spent 9 weeks engineering with the precision of people who understand that certain moments have only one chance to happen correctly, was that Amara Whitfield, 21 years old, a nursing student at Ohio State, had found him. She had found the letters 2 years earlier, in a box her mother had kept in a storage unit, and had never mentioned. 31 letters. Every one of them dated. Every one of them addressed to her. She had read all 31 in one, sitting on the floor of her campus apartment, with her roommate sitting beside her, not speaking, just present, the way certain friends know how to be. She had spent 2 months trying to locate her father before a mutual contact had given her his address in Akron. She had written him a letter. She had not mailed it. She had written 6 more. She had not mailed those either. She had contacted the Family Feud production team in January and asked them to help her find a way. They had said yes. They had spent 9 weeks making sure it was right. The producers had confirmed James's appearance. They had briefed Amara on the taping format and kept her in a separate arrival location. Steve Harvey had been told everything. He had spent 17 minutes in his dressing room after the briefing, which his assistant later said was the longest he had ever spent alone before a taping. The game had been designed to let James play 3 full rounds before anything shifted. 3 rounds of Family Feud played by a man who had written 31 letters to an address that had stopped being current. He had been sharp, present, competitive. The kind of competitor who has learned to focus completely on whatever is in front of him because the alternative is thinking about everything behind him. But the real story hadn't even started yet. Between rounds 3 and 4, Steve Harvey walked away from the podium. He walked to James's side of the stage with the pace of a man who is carrying something. He said, "James, can I ask you something personal?" James said yes. Steve said, "Is there someone you've been trying to find?" The studio went very quiet. James looked at Steve for a moment. Then he said, "My daughter. I haven't seen her in 17 years. He said it simply, without decoration, the way people state facts they have long since stopped expecting anyone to be able to change. Steve Harvey said, "What would you say to her if she was here right now?" James was quiet for 11 seconds. Then he said, "That I never stopped. That not a single day went by, that the letters were real, and the love was real, and I know she can't know that from the outside, but it was. Every day." Steve Harvey said, "James, she's behind that door." The door at the back of Studio A opened. Amara Whitfield was 21 years old and walked like her father. The same forward lean, the same measured pace, the specific physical grammar that children inherit and don't know they've inherited. She was wearing a blue sweater. She had her father's eyes. She crossed the studio floor while 300 people held their breath, and James Whitfield brought his hands up to cover his face. Because there are some moments the human face is not designed to experience in public, and this was one of them. She put her arms around him before he lowered his hands. They stood at the center of the Family Feud stage for a long time. The audience did not make a sound. Steve Harvey had walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, not on the edge, but on the floor proper. And he sat with his face in his hands and his shoulders moving, and made no attempt to manage it. A camera operator to the left of the stage had stopped operating his camera. The floor manager had her clipboard flat against her chest. Even the crew members in the lighting booth, visible through the glass at the back of the studio, had stopped moving. When Steve stood, his face was what it was. He said, "Give me a second." He took 3. Then he said, "I want to tell you something, James and Amara." He looked at both of them. "I know what it is to feel like the system failed you, to do everything right and still lose, to keep going anyway, not because you know it's going to work out, but because stopping is not something you're willing to do." He paused. "I was living in my car in 1987. My family didn't know where I was. I was too ashamed to tell them. And the thing that kept me from disappearing completely was the thought that someone was still out there, waiting on a version of me that hadn't given up. He looked at James. "You kept going for 17 years, 31 letters to an address that didn't work. And she found every one of them." He pressed his handkerchief to his face. "That's what love that doesn't quit looks like." He was not finished. Steve pulled out his phone and called his family law contact, an attorney specializing in parental rights restoration who he had worked with on 2 previous cases. On the stage floor, on speaker, he asked about the legal process for James to formally reestablish his documented relationship with Amara now that she was an adult and initiating contact. The attorney outlined the steps in 4 minutes. Steve committed, live, to covering all associated legal fees. He said, "No paperwork is going to stand between this man and his daughter again. Not if I can do anything about it." He announced both families would receive the full day's prize. The competing family, the Hendersons from Birmingham, had been standing at their podium in complete stillness since the door opened. Their grandmother, a woman named Estelle, walked across the stage uninvited, put her hand on James's arm, and said, "God heard those letters, baby. Every one." James could not respond. He nodded once. The episode aired 7 weeks later. The clip of James covering his face with his hands at the moment the door opened and Amara reaching him before he lowered them was viewed 290 million times in 10 days. The hashtag "The Letters Were Real" was used in 38 countries. 4 adoption and family reunification advocacy organizations cited the moment in their annual reports as the most viewed illustration of parental love in the organization's history. 3 months after the taping, James and Amara had met privately 8 times. Coffee in Akron, dinner in Columbus, one afternoon at the manufacturing plant where James worked, where he showed her the locker where he kept a photograph he had never put away. She had looked at the photograph for a long time. It was from her 4th birthday. He had taken it the last time he saw her. She was wearing a red dress and holding a balloon. She remembered the red dress. A year after the taping, Amara Whitfield graduated from Ohio State's nursing program. James was in the 2nd row, in a suit he had bought for the occasion. He cried during the ceremony, openly, without apology. Amara walked across the stage, accepted her diploma, found him in the 2nd row, and raised her diploma directly at him. 300 people who did not know the story gave the gesture a spontaneous round of applause anyway, because some things are visible, even without context. James Whitfield has 31 letters in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of his desk at home. He has shown them to Amara. She has read all of them again, this time with him present. She asked him why he kept sending them to an address he knew was wrong. He said, "Because the only thing worse than sending a letter that doesn't arrive is not sending it." She has kept every one. If this incredible story of a father who never stopped and the daughter who found every letter touched your heart, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your family. Have you ever held on when everything told you to let go? Share your story in the comments. Because as James and Amara proved, love does not have an expiration date.